sell out soon. So I'm kind of a newbie, a validator wannabe. So I know Max, you use cloud for validating, and then I've seen some comments recently from Gamma about, if your electricity goes down, you need to have some hardware with the battery backup, and you have to get all these other things. So then I'm kind of curious. Well, I really like cloud software platform as a service, and maybe I can install it on cloud service. So just wondering, is what pros and cons of that? Is it expensive to like with the NUC, you got to buy the hardware, but for cloud you got to pay for running the server all along. So just wondering, what are the indicative costs of that?
Yeah, so good question. And a lot of people ask this too. I'd say most people just say, "Oh, don't do the cloud because decentralization." And my first thought is, first of all, do you think Richard or the devs were running it at his castle, like the 4,000 validators there? You think they were all running in his castle? Probably not. They were in the cloud. As far as I think, a safe assumption they were in AWS or otherwise. So I prefer everyone. I'm glad most people want to run them at home using a NUC or using whatever hardware you have that you think is reliable enough and all that. But the pros and cons, I've had tweets on this before too. But basically, if you're running at home, you need to take care of utility bills. You need to make the upfront cost for the hardware. You need to have battery backup to make sure it's at least on for a little bit of time. Hopefully, you're never in an environment where there's a hurricane or otherwise, and you maybe go offline and cost yourself some PLS and stuff like that. To me, I like the simplest option, and I've used different cloud services for years. So for me, it's just it's natural for me to run stuff in the cloud, especially servers, because there's advantages for security at home. I would recommend people, do like an extra router to have physical separation, isolation from the network, all that stuff too that I've talked about during Validator AMAs. So there's a lot of things to know if you're running it at home to do. However, it is your hardware. It does feel like that kind of feels good to run your own hardware, turn it on and off, all that stuff. But yeah, now you assume all the responsibility. However, if you run in the cloud, most of that goes away. They give you this virtual server. You don't really care what hardware it has other than it has the minimum specs that you want, and you pay a monthly fee. Now, the question you asked about cost, that's been the biggest factor for me is AWS is pretty expensive. And that's why I recently migrated from AWS to DigitalOcean, which hopefully it's going to be much cheaper. I've yet to do it a month yet, so I don't have any estimates, but it should be like AWS was like $600-700 a month. And it was like, oh, that's crazy with Pulse price the way they are. Well, what if Pulse goes to a penny? What if Pulse does much better than it does now? Then I'm not really, for me, I don't really worry about the ROI, like the first year or two. I went into it assuming, it was going to be at a loss for a while until the market turned around or otherwise. But DigitalOcean, so far, I have the highest hopes of it being the cheapest provider, and pretty similar services, DigitalOcean and AWS. But I was just more familiar with AWS. That's why I tried them first. But they're just too expensive when there's other cheaper options such as DO. So on the wiki, I'll drop in the chat if anyone's interested as well. I have like a doc on both of them, how to run an AWS. If anyone's interested in the cloud for that, goes through the whole process, tells you, all the recommendations, how to set up the firewall, all that stuff. And the same thing, DigitalOcean. This is one I just wrote the other day. I'm actually running on 16 gigabytes. So I've tried this, which the last AMA, I went through some of the, nuances around that. I think it took longer to sync, which took me offline for a couple of days and made the migration process a little bit more funny. I have a sense to blame that on the lower specs that I was testing out, because 32 gig of RAM is the consensus and all that stuff. But anyways, if you're interested in doing it in DigitalOcean, I have all the stuff you need to know, a little bit of technical stuff here. But generally, if you are comfortable doing it in the cloud, you still need to know Linux, you still need to know that stuff, but it just gives you the ability to worry less about your physical environment and let them take care of the power and the uptime and all that stuff, which is usually pretty high for cloud providers. So either way you want to do it, if you want to NUC, validatorstore.com, David Feeder, he sells them. He actually does cloud hosting stuff too as well. But he sells the hardware kit, the NUC here. Don't know if Intel is going to discontinue or not, but these kind of things are kind of meant to last for a while anyways. He sells them on validatorstore.com. Or if you want to do cloud, like I said, I have all the documentation on the wiki on how to do everything on a validator, just about, including how to set up a cloud server to run it there.